Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our podcast, Classical Discoveries. We are very thankful that you join us today. We have very interesting music to listen to, and we are talking today with my partner Jens about this. Okay, Jens. I mean, Dmitri Shostakovich is really a discovery, or
No, he's clearly established.
it's clearly established, well known. But what we are talking about is a kind of a, can I say, a kind of shadow compositions. He did a lot.
Well, in a way, it is because Shostakovich, as a film composer, is not as well known to Western audiences as he is as a concert composer or concert music composer.
I thought already we should rename our podcast to Classical Film Compositions Discoveries, because it is, I think, the fourth or fifth already. We're just talking about film music, but it's interesting. Maybe most of the people don't know that also Dmitri Shostakovich, who became so famous with his symphonies, did nearly about 40 scores for the film industry.
Well, I mean, in the 20th century, most classical composers had to earn money with film music. I think the reason that Shostakovich is less well known as a film composer and so clearly in our perception known as a serious composer is because we simply didn't find and see those films because they were for Soviet consumption and had little to no distribution in the West. It's not like Visconti or Fellini or Ben-Hur or The Godfather, which we are well familiar with. It's films that are very interesting. I've seen two, I think, now, and I've listened to the whole box that has come out.
Yes, this is the good news of the day, because we couldn't watch the films, but we can present a 7 CD box of this amazing film music Shostakovich wrote for different kind of movies. I mean, there are these classical theatrical movies like King Lear or Hamlet. Then, of course, I mean, also in the Soviet time, most of the films have been a kind of propaganda.
I mean, if you were a filmmaker, you were serving the state
Yeah.
with your art.
Well,
And that's not to say that they didn't create great art, but it was, at least on the surface,
yeah.
meant to support the message of a state, depending always on the political climate, of course. During Stalin's time, I think these films tended more towards the propagandistic, and then later on, perhaps less so. But also, it seems that he took a lot of liberties and had a lot of fun with his music, because as I was listening through the whole box over the last couple of days, I noticed, first of all, not a whole lot of it sounds super typically Shostakovichian, as we might know. We know the Shostakovich string quartets and the concertos and the symphonies, and that has a certain, within a couple of bars, you usually know it's Shostakovich. With the film music, not so much. And a lot of quotes. There's the Cancan here from Offenbach, and then there's Beethoven there.
I come later on this, yes, just to show you, ladies and gentlemen, I have a short video clip from a Naxos production, because they also made some CDs with Shostakovich film music, and I made a short promotional video with them, and you can see how much fun really the musicians have to perform this kind of music. really. I mean, if you watch the clarinets down the streets, it's funny music. It's amazing, happily music. I'm moving from 1955, and if I studied all the scores here, we are talking today about really the Gadfly has the most funniest music of Shostakovich at all, really.
Even though the first movement that's included here is titled Italian Partisans versus Austrian Invasion.
No, this is just my note that I can tell you something about the movie. Yeah, the movie is bad for Austrians because it portrays the Italian partisans. They are fighting against Austria.
Evil Austria.
Evil Austria.
Invaders.
Yeah, invaders. Yeah.
But still, the music is fun.
Absolutely fun. Absolutely fun. Also, yeah.
Now I want to see the movie.
But the most famous part of it, maybe you know already, is this beautiful the romance from the Gadfly.
It kind of makes you wonder where are they having time for romance when they're trying to shoot each other down from the Dolomites.
Yeah, but a movie is not always just shooting. They also have relaxed love scenes, and things.
It's like Hollywood.
Yeah, of course, it was Russian Hollywood, of course. I mean, we all know James Bond. I realized when I was in Petersburg at Landfilm, I saw there in the catalogs they also have a kind of James Bond, but the Russian are the goods and the Americans are the bad, But of course we didn't know. Yeah. But I think Shostakovich really had big fun with the genre of film music.
Well, I'm sure he tried to. I mean, he grew up playing in a movie house,
Yeah.
improvising the piano interludes. So he really comes from film music. That was an essential part of his musical upbringing. And but we also know that he was well regarded by Stalin for writing film music, and some argue that might have helped save his life because Stalin was so keen on Shostakovich writing for film productions in the Soviet Union that he was indispensable. So when he had to lay low because he had upset the apparatchiks, he composed a few film scores, a few melodies to the paeans to Stalin himself. There are at least several films in there in which Stalin is portrayed by Stalin's favorite actor for playing himself. Yeah. There was certainly also a pragmatic side to having written all that film music.
Of course, I mean, if we compare this with Schnittke really was much more experimental in this music, Shostakovich had to stay very traditional, as I just said, because he got the money from the apparatchiks, he got the money from Stalin, so he had to make a common movies,
Now Schnittke, of course, I forgot him. We've talked about him with.
But Schnittke was later on. Schnittke was a bit later on, But interesting is Shostakovich started the film music. His first score was the New Babylon. The first score was the New Babylon from 1928. So Shostakovich really was very young. And the New Babylon was a silent movie, how you say, Stummmusik? Yeah? A silent movie. That means he had to compose more than 100 minutes of music,
Good for us.
So this is not like...
Does the movie have a score throughout?
There's a complete score, yes. It's 2 CDs.
Wow.
A complete score, yeah.
But
And-
that's not all in here.
Yes, that's all. Complete Babylon. Yeah. The new Babylon. Yeah.
On CD2. Oh, yeah, and then a little bit into CD3.
Well,
Yeah, I went right through that, and because the music is so diverse, that's the difference between film music and a symphony. It doesn't have that arc.
of course.
It's snippet, snippet. It's like miniatures.
Yes.
And that's also perhaps the reason why it sounds so diverse.
Yeah. But it's interesting because for the full, it's really such a big score, I would say, you know. So 90 or 100 music, fully composed music. This movie shows a community, a Paris community in 1871. And of course, there is these festive things, blah, 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 you know, girls dancing, men drinking, you know. We don't want to know what they are doing afterwards. Shostakovich brings a very funny quotation about Offenbach's Cocon, and let us listen now how this sounds, the version of a Shostakovich Cocon from Offenbach.
It sounds like an orchestra playing Offenbach after they had a few too many vodkas.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I feel sorry when I listen to this to the first trumpet. He has such a lips.
It's in a way, it's foreshadowing what Schnittke would do later,
Yeah, yeah.
which Schnittke would do more extreme. Like he would take something that's known and then sort of melt it down and would go in all directions. And Shostakovich just takes a few notes and surprises you.
Yeah, yeah. If we are now on the quotations, you know, his most famous quotation is in the movie 5 Days and 5 Nights, which is a movie about the liberation of Dresden. You know, of course, it's a political propaganda film, like the same with the fall of Berlin. You know, all the things, and of course, you have to listen now really how Shostakovich is playing in the liberation of Dresden, the freedom, with Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy.
So, you know, that's how the reorchestration of Mahler should have sounded.
You're right, yeah. Of course.
It's interesting how it starts almost more Russian and then it becomes more Beethoven.
Of course, yeah.
And it's sort of it's kind of the movement of the army from Russia or the Soviet Union to Germany. Tell me a little how did you or Yurovsky or the two of you choose which suites and which films to pick and which to record and over what period?
It was just a simple question of what was available, because most of the scores were stayed some were hidden also in the Glinka Museum in Moscow, and it was or is still problematic to get them out. But now you have, I think, the nearly the complete Shostakovich edition available. You know, at that time, I mean, we made this in the 90s.
So did you travel to Moscow and St. Petersburg and went into?
I traveled to Moscow and Petersburg to meet the people there from Mosfilm and Lenfilm because I wanted to get the movies out for DVD. I was in Petersburg and they gave me a VHS recorder, you know, at the time, and made me copy of Hamlet and all the things, so Shostakovich. Huh? The actor was so fantastic. I understand nothing of it. But I was watching more than 2 hours. I was watching, just fascinated to this movie.
So if I want to see these films, I actually can because you made them available in the West.
No, I didn't make the deal. I couldn't make the deal because of different reasons. But the crazy thing is, if you Google them, they're all available on YouTube. Okay. Most of them are really available on YouTube, you know. But coming back to the theater movies, there is a beautiful King Lear. He once made incidental music already in the 1940s. Yeah, in the 1940s, and later on he made music to the film in 2 parts in 1970s or 30 years later. He also had a fantastic and heart-touching, you say heart-touching? If something
Heartwarming, yeah, sure.
Or heart-warming Song of the Cordelia. I have to...
What could be more heartwarming than a song to Cornelia?
Cordelia.
What's a letter between friends?
yeah, of course, you know. So this is really heart-touching music. You totally different other Shostakovich than you find in the symphonies.
I was going to ask, what do you think might be the reason that Prokofiev is actually much better known in the West as a film composer than Shostakovich? Is it just because the films that Prokofiev composed for are such classics that they were...
Is it really so that Prokofiev is more famous?
Yeah, and I think it's got to be Eisenstein ultimately, because Eisenstein was studied
okay,
in the West.
Okay.
If you were a film student.
Yeah. Ivan Grosny and all these things and all that. That's right. Maybe he had the better movies or the more famous movies, you know.
Probably. I mean, who's gonna watch The Fall of Berlin?
Yeah.
In film class in Fargo, in 1995.
But there are so many little treasuries really in this thing. I can show you, because we're just talking about the propaganda, Fall of Berlin, Of course, there is a lot of this fighting music on Sieg Oberhöhen, and the Russian will now
Conquer.
will conquer Berlin, and so there is a fascinating scene in the garden, which is then sounds like this.
In a Western movie, that would have been the scene where it's Christmas and they fall on their knees in the snow and the vision of the Holy Mary appears to them.
Yeah, yeah.
And we all get solemn for a little second before the artillery starts again.
Yeah, you wouldn't think it's just a coverage. No, I mean, this was bad for the producer because only for this track you had to engage a choir. There were extra cost, extra choir, but very heart touching again.
And I mean, it's only film music. There's still that stereotype, but you have fantastic orchestras and wonderful conductors. James Judd, I think, is a really, really good conductor.
Yeah.
Very much underrated.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Mahler won, by the way, with
Okay.
and Mikhail Yurovsky, of course. So it's good to hear that music well performed. And of
I
course,
think it's well performed. I cannot praise ourselves, but
you can't, but Dave Horwitz can,
oh yeah, the forwards can.
and he
yes.
has.
He had. Okay.
Oh,
So thank you to Dave Horwitz.
hey, Dave.
I think there is still more film music to discover. It's not all, In this thing, there are also for, wie sagt man denn, Trickfilme, for
Cartoons,
cartoons, yeah.
animated films.
Also animated for cartoons, yeah, genau. But then Shostakovich became also in the film music very, very famous for waltzes. He composed amazing waltzes. But I would say like
We have in Golden Mountains, we have a waltz.
yeah, he made wonderful and big waltzes. Yeah, this is really a wonderful Viennese waltz, Viennese Russian waltz, or Russian Viennese waltz.
And I thought it interesting, like right after I heard that waltz, I was jarred because there comes a fugue and it's pure organ music.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I've heard organ music by Shostakovich before.
No, but it is in the context of the movie.
Right. So
Yeah. And there's also in Hamlet, there's only just a choir. After the storm, he only makes huge voices, only choir a cappella for 5 minutes, you know. It's really totally funny. I think his darkest score really is for the music for the film King Lear, which he made in 1917.
so he was old. He was
was-
himself near death.
Yeah,
And knew about it.
and there is not so much like we had in The Gadfly or whatever, or blah, 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 funny.
Well, that would be
funny
hard to
music.
put into the King Lear, right?
Yeah, would also be hard to do.
It's not a laugh riot.
In the King Lear, yeah. But there is, when he composed The Catastrophe, I mean, this reminds me really very much to the symphonies, no?
The last part.
The last part, yeah,
that's-
absolutely.
That could have been
This is absolutely,
any of
yeah,
his late
yeah.
symphonies, the 15th,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
example.
As we talk now so much about Soviet music and Russian film music, I hope we did it well and we get now some, wie sagt man, eine Belohnung?
A little. Do you really want to get a treat from Russian sources these days?
And we get a...
It's a little sketchy.
No, this is...
Oh, we reward ourselves, I think.
Oh, we wrote ourselves? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're thirsty now, having talked.
Okay. So I think now
A little water.
to listen all the Shostakovich. Now we are allowed to drink a bit of this famous Russian
Russian little water.
little water, famous Russian little water.
I like how you do things in style.
Okay. I don't know really how much Mr. Shostakovich has drank in this kind of
More than
podcast.
that, probably.
Yeah, okay. Because this is like drinking tea in England. You drink vodka in Russia, you know.
I'm going to have to suggest a Scottish composer to do next.
Okay, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you had our fun. You hope you're fun. Also, machen wir Werbung.
We'll get another reward. You know? Well,
Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you had some fun. See you next time when wir, was heißt denn nüchtern?
cheers, when we're sobered up again.
Okay, see you next time when we are.
Sober again.
Okay.
Cheers.